This officer thought he was in control. He was wrong. It started with a broken taillight. That's what the report would say. That's what the body cam would show. A routine stop on the east side of the city. Quiet street, light traffic, 8:42 p.m. Officer Daniel Mercer liked routine stops. They were small stages, and tonight he had an audience. The cruiser lights painted the asphalt red and blue as a black sedan eased to the curb without hesitation. No sudden movements, no argument. Engine off within seconds. Inside sat a man in a pressed charcoal jacket, late 30s, maybe early 40s. Composed posture, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He didn't look nervous. That bothered Mercer immediately. He approached slow, confident, chest out, one hand resting near his holster. License and registration. The driver nodded once. No attitude, no apology either. Just silence. Mercer leaned slightly to peer inside. "You understand why I pulled you over?" The man's voice was steady. "You can tell me, officer." Polite, too polite. Mercer smiled thinly. "Broken tail light. You didn't think I'd notice?" The man glanced in his rearview mirror. "I wasn't aware of that." "You weren't aware." Mercer repeated it like a joke. Backup hadn't been called. It didn't need to be. Mercer liked to handle things himself. He stepped back as the man retrieved his documents slowly, every movement deliberate, measured, almost instructional. Mercer scanned the license. Adrian Cole. No criminal flags, no warrants. Out-of-state address. Mercer's eyes lingered. "You from around here, Mr. Cole?" "Passing through." "Passing through?" Mercer handed the ID back slower than necessary. "Funny. We've had some issues lately with people just passing through." There it was, the hook, the suggestion. Adrian didn't respond. Silence is uncomfortable for men who expect dominance. Mercer tried again. "You mind stepping out of the vehicle?" "Am I being detained?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "Yes." "For what reason?" The air shifted. A neighbor's porch light flicked on across the street. Mercer stepped closer to the door. "Step out of the car." Adrian complied. No resistance, no raised voice, just slow compliance. He stood straight, hands visible, posture almost relaxed. Mercer circled him like he was evaluating a suspect twice his size. "You nervous, Mr. Cole?" "No. Most people get nervous." "I'm not most people." That one landed. Mercer smirked. "We'll see about that." He gestured toward the trunk. "Pop it." Adrian held his gaze. "Do you have probable cause?" There it was again. Measured language. Precise. Mercer's voice hardened. "You think you know the law?" "I respect it." That was the moment Mercer decided this wasn't about a taillight anymore. It was about control. He signaled for backup. 2 more cruisers rolled in within minutes, lights flashing, neighbors watching now from behind curtains. One officer whispered to Mercer, "What's the issue?" "Uncooperative," Mercer said flatly. Adrian stood still. "I've complied with every instruction." Mercer ignored him. "We're going to search the vehicle." "On what grounds?" Mercer stepped closer. "You're obstructing." "How?" Mercer didn't answer. He reached for Adrian's wrist, and that's when something subtle changed. Adrian didn't resist, but he did speak, calmly, evenly. "Officer, I advise you reconsider." The second officer laughed quietly. "Is that a threat?" "No," Adrian said, "a courtesy." Mercer tightened the cuffs. Cold steel clicked into place, and that click echoed louder than it should have. Because across the street, someone was recording, and down the block, someone else was streaming. And inside one of those quiet houses sat a retired federal compliance attorney who recognized the name Adrian Cole immediately. Mercer began the search aggressively. Glove compartment, back seat, trunk, nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no suspicious items, just a briefcase. Locked. Mercer held it up. "What's in here?" "Work. Open it." I don't consent to that search. Mercer pried it open anyway. Inside, neatly organized files, a slim encrypted laptop, a leather folio, and a badge. Not a police badge, something else. Dark silver, minimalist design, an eagle insignia, 3 letters engraved beneath it. F.O.D. Mercer frowned. What is this? Adrian's voice remained level. You should call your supervisor. One of the backup officers stepped closer. His face shifted slightly. I've seen that before, he muttered. Mercer snapped. Seen what? The officer swallowed. Federal Oversight Division. Silence, the kind that tightens lungs. Mercer looked at Adrian differently now. You're federal? Adrian met his eyes. I didn't say that. The second officer stepped back instinctively. Mercer's confidence cracked just slightly. Why didn't you identify yourself? You didn't ask. That landed harder than anything else. Within 12 minutes, a black SUV arrived without sirens, no markings, just presence. 2 individuals stepped out in dark suits. Calm, efficient. One of them approached Mercer directly. You detained Mr. Cole? Mercer straightened. Routine stop. He was being... The suited man held up a hand. We're aware. Aware. Not asking. Aware. He turned to Adrian and nodded once. No handshake, no warmth. Just acknowledgement. Mercer felt the ground shift beneath him. The suited woman opened a tablet. Officer Mercer, badge number 4172. 3 prior complaints. 2 dismissed. 1 pending internal review. Mercer blinked. What is this? A broader audit, she replied. Adrian flexed his wrist slightly. The cuffs were removed immediately. Neighbors were fully outside now, phones raised, whispers spreading. Mr. Cole has been conducting compliance assessments in multiple municipalities, the suited man said calmly. Your department was scheduled for review next quarter. Scheduled. Mercer felt heat rise in his face. You set me up, he snapped. Adrian shook his head slightly. No. You performed. That was the collapse. Public, irreversible. Backup officers avoided eye contact. One cruiser quietly shut off its lights. The suited woman continued. Body cam footage will be collected, dash cam as well. We'll require your incident report before end of shift. Mercer's voice faltered. For a taillight? Adrian answered this time. It was never about the taillight. Silence stretched again, and in that silence lived something bigger. Because this wasn't the first city. 3 weeks ago, a judge in Northbridge had publicly reprimanded a defendant before discovering who he was connected to. 2 months before that, a corporate security chief in West Haven had threatened legal action against an unassuming consultant. Both cases now sat under quiet federal inquiry. No headlines. Yet, but patterns were forming. And somewhere above all of it, unseen names were beginning to surface. The shadow entity funding certain municipal contracts, the same private security vendor embedded in multiple cities, the same legal firm advising departments under review, threads connected. Mercer looked at Adrian one last time. Why not just say who you were? Adrian paused. The porch lights, the cameras, the silence of the street. Because authority reveals itself when unobserved. The suited agents escorted him toward the black SUV. But before entering, Adrian glanced back, not at Mercer, at the watching neighbors, at the phones recording, at the system quietly shifting. And then he left. The next morning, the footage would circulate, not viral, not sensational, but deliberate, analyzed, debated. Was the officer wrong? Or just conditioned by a system that rewarded escalation? Was Adrian right to stay silent? Or did he bait the collapse? Online forums would argue. Comment sections would divide. But inside federal offices across several states, a list was growing. Cities under review, departments flagged, contracts examined, and at the center of it all, a quiet name appearing again and again. Adrian Cole. Some called him a compliance auditor. Some whispered internal affairs on steroids. Others believed he was something deeper, something connected to a task force that didn't officially exist. The Federal Oversight Division, unofficial motto, calm reveals corruption. Mercer would be placed on administrative leave by sunrise. An internal memo would leak by noon. By next week, 2 council members would quietly resign. And in another city, hundreds of miles away, a different authority figure would cross a line. Not knowing the same black sedan had just entered their jurisdiction. Because this wasn't the only city under review. And above the Federal Oversight Division, above municipal politics, above departmental pride, there was something else. Something funding resistance to oversight. Something very interested in keeping systems opaque. Adrian knew. He just hadn't said it yet. He never said it first. He let them reveal themselves. That was the method. That was the engine. And it was only beginning. Was this justice? Or was it entrapment? Should authority be tested or trusted? And if you were in that driver's seat, would you have stayed silent? Morning didn't break gently for Officer Mercer. It detonated. At 6:12 a.m., his phone began vibrating against his nightstand. Not 1 call, not 2. 7 missed calls from internal affairs. 3 from his union rep. 1 from an unknown D.C. number. He didn't answer. By 7:03 a.m., the footage had been clipped, edited, and posted. Not sensationalized, not dramatized, just clean cuts, body cam angle, street audio, his voice escalating, Adrian staying level. The moment the cuffs clicked, the badge, the shift, the silence. It wasn't viral in the chaotic sense. It was surgical. Local legal forums began dissecting it first. Then civil rights analysts. Then former officers weighing in. Then policy watchdog groups. The title circulating on multiple platforms read, Routine Stop Raises Compliance Questions in East District. Neutral, but devastating. By 9:30 a.m., Mercer sat in a gray conference room inside headquarters. Across from him were 2 internal affairs investigators and a woman he didn't recognize. She introduced herself simply. Dana Rowe, Federal Liaison. No badge displayed, no raised voice, just presence. Mercer leaned back in his chair. So, what is this really about? Rowe folded her hands. Patterns, he scoffed. You're blowing this out of proportion. One investigator slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed still frames from the stop. Another folder followed. Citizen complaints, escalation reports, stop and search ratios. 3 prior warnings about tone and procedural compliance, the investigator said evenly. Mercer felt heat crawl up his neck. I do my job. Rowe tilted her head slightly. Do you? The room cooled. She tapped the folder. Your department's stop data shows a 37% spike in discretionary searches over the past 18 months. That's proactive policing. Without corresponding increase in contraband recovery, she replied calmly. Silence. Mercer looked between them. You're using me as an example. Rowe didn't deny it. You were scheduled to be part of a compliance observation sample next quarter. Observation? Passive, she clarified. Until last night. Mercer swallowed. That man, Cole. He baited me. Rowe's expression didn't move. He complied. He challenged my authority. He asked for probable cause. The investigator leaned forward. Which is his right? Mercer's jaw tightened. But somewhere in the building, something larger was unfolding. Because Adrian wasn't at home. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't doing interviews. He was seated in the back of that same black SUV, now parked in an underground garage 2 cities over. Across from him sat a man known only in internal memos as Director Hale. No first name in circulation, no public footprint. East District reacted predictably, Hale said. Adrian nodded once. Escalation threshold was low. Hale studied him. You could have de-escalated verbally. I did. You could have identified yourself. Yes, but you didn't. Adrian looked out the tinted window. You don't measure culture when people know they're being graded. Hale allowed the silence to breathe. On the dashboard screen between them, a map glowed. Multiple cities marked with subtle amber indicators. East District had just turned red. Hale tapped another city. Northbridge. Judge Ellison has requested a formal response from us. Adrian's gaze shifted slightly. 3 weeks ago, in a courtroom in Northbridge, a defendant had been publicly reprimanded for wasting the court's time. The defendant had quietly requested procedural clarification. The judge had mocked him. That clip had circulated too. Not explosive, just revealing. Now, Northbridge was amber, possibly red soon. And West Haven? Adrian asked. Hale's expression hardened. Corporate security escalation is deeper than expected. The same private vendor appeared again. Embedded security contracts, advising multiple municipalities, consulting on risk reduction frameworks, all tied to a holding company few outside procurement circles recognized, Ardent Strategic Holdings. The name never appeared on official department websites, but the contracts traced back there, and Ardent had recently tripled its municipal security footprint. Hale turned the screen slightly. Someone is preparing for resistance. Adrian nodded faintly. Or hiding something. Or both. Silence again. The SUV engine hummed. Above them, a city was beginning its day, unaware it had just joined a growing list. Hale studied Adrian carefully. Public reaction is divided. It should be. Some say you humiliated him. Adrian's expression didn't change. I didn't raise my voice. You let him hang himself. Adrian finally looked at Hale directly. No, he said calmly. He climbed. The tension in the vehicle shifted. Hale exhaled quietly. We're receiving pushback. From 3 city managers, 2 state-level representatives, and a private legal consortium advising departments under review. Adrian already knew which consortium. They rarely named it out loud, but the pattern was unmistakable. Same language and response letters, same procedural objections, same external counsel. The network wasn't defensive, it was coordinated. Back at headquarters, Mercer stepped out of the conference room into a hallway lined with officers who avoided eye contact. Administrative leave, effective immediately. Weapons surrendered, badge retained pending review. He walked past the break room. 2 younger officers were whispering. Should have just written the ticket. Why search the car? Did you see the badge? Mercer kept walking. Outside, news vans were beginning to stage. Not national networks, local, measured, but enough. Across town, a community meeting was already being scheduled. Public accountability forum, live-streamed. A council member had posted at 8:47 a.m. We welcome transparency. He didn't know his procurement emails were already under federal review. Adrian stepped out of the SUV into a secure operations office. Minimal branding, no public directory listing. Inside, a small team monitored feeds from various municipalities. Dashcam uploads, public complaint databases, procurement bids, insurance liability adjustments, patterns, always patterns. On one wall hung a digital board listing cities under varying levels of review. Green, amber, red. East District now pulsed softly in red, but something else blinked unexpectedly. A city that had been green for months. Suddenly, amber. Why the shift? Adrian asked quietly. An analyst swiveled her chair. Anonymous procurement tip. Emergency expansion of crowd control equipment, fast-tracked contract. With who? She tapped the screen. Ardent Strategic Holdings. Again. The room fell into a thinking silence. Director Hale stepped in behind them. Cross-reference with upcoming public events. The analyst complied, A large civic demonstration scheduled in that city in 6 weeks. Peaceful protest permits already filed. Hale's voice lowered. They're preparing. For what? The analyst asked. Adrian answered. Visibility. Because oversight wasn't just about misconduct. It was about systems bracing for exposure. And the higher the review climbed, the more resistance hardened. Back in East District, Mercer sat in his parked car outside his home, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He replayed the moment Adrian had said, "You should call your supervisor." Not defiant, not angry, just certain. For the first time, Mercer felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not humiliation. Doubt. Had he escalated unnecessarily? Or had he simply been operating the way the culture trained him to? That question would linger. And that was the real fracture. Because the Federal Oversight Division wasn't hunting villains, it was exposing culture. And culture rarely collapses quietly. That afternoon, a closed-door meeting occurred at Ardent Strategic Holdings regional office. No press, no public minutes. Executives reviewed footage from East District, paused on Adrian's face, rewound, zoomed. "He's accelerating timelines," one executive muttered. Another nodded. "If municipalities start questioning contracts, then we remind them of their risk exposure." Through insurance leverage, liability modeling, political pressure. Calm voices, strategic. They weren't panicked. They were calculating. Because they had operated quietly for years, embedding themselves in cities under the banner of efficiency and security. And now, someone was testing the infrastructure. Back at the operations office, Adrian stood alone for a moment, looking at the board. Northbridge, West Haven, East District. And now this new city turning amber. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply adjusted his cufflinks slightly. Somewhere in the building, a junior analyst whispered, "Is he the only one?" The senior analyst replied quietly, "No, he's just the visible one." That was the thread few understood. Adrian wasn't the division. He was one instrument. And above even Director Hale, oversight extended further. Unseen committees, quiet authorizations, jurisdictional gray zones. The network went higher every time. By evening, Mercer's union released a statement defending his commitment to proactive policing. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some critical. The debate split along familiar lines: justice or entrapment, overreach or accountability. But inside federal systems, debate wasn't the priority. Data was, and data was aligning. Late that night, Adrian received a secure message, no sender ID, just a short line. "They know you're mapping procurement flows." He stared at the screen, no emotional shift, just processing. Director Hale entered moments later. "We traced the encryption. It's sophisticated." "Ardent?" Adrian asked. "Possibly. Or someone higher," Adrian said quietly. Hale didn't respond, because both of them understood something unsettling. Ardent might not be the top. It might be a layer, a visible shield for something less visible, and that possibility shifted the entire scope. Outside, another city council somewhere approved a fast-track security amendment, another quiet contract, another data point. The map on the wall pulsed softly in the dim light. More amber, more red. Adrian finally powered off the screen in front of him. He stood in the quiet operations room, alone. Authority had been tested. A public collapse had occurred. But the real confrontation hadn't even started. Because exposing culture is one thing. Exposing the architects of that culture is something else entirely. And somewhere, in offices far above municipal lines, someone was beginning to notice his name. Adrian Cole. Calm, measured, unshaken. The question wasn't whether cities were under review. It was how high the review would climb, and whether the system would reform quietly or resist violently. This wasn't the only city shifting. It wasn't the only contract being examined. And it certainly wasn't the only authority figure about to mistake silence for weakness. The map glowed in the dark. One new city flickered red, and no one there knew yet that they were next. 6 weeks later, the city that flickered amber turned loud. Not with sirens, with permits. Civic banners lined the downtown corridor. Temporary stages were being assembled, barricades stacked neatly at intersections under the pretense of crowd guidance. Publicly, it was a peaceful demonstration. Privately, procurement orders told a different story. Adrian stood on a pedestrian overpass overlooking the square the night before the event. Below him, municipal workers finished installing portable surveillance towers recently leased under an emergency amendment. The vendor name didn't appear on the equipment, but the serial registry traced back to Ardent Strategic Holdings. Again, a soft wind carried the hum of generators upward. Director Hale stood beside him. "They tripled their insurance coverage this week," Hale said quietly. "For property damage?" Adrian asked. "For civil liability." Adrian's eyes tracked a row of newly delivered riot shields being unloaded into a secured side entrance of City Hall. "This is posture," he said. "Or anticipation," Hale replied. "Of what?" Hale didn't answer immediately. Below, the police chief exited the building, speaking into a phone. His posture rigid, his movements tight. Adrian watched carefully. Calm reveals corruption, but it also reveals fear, and fear was visible tonight. The next morning began with speeches. Community leaders took the stage first, measured words, calls for transparency, demands for budget accountability. Livestream viewers climbed steadily. Uniformed officers lined the perimeter, faces composed, hands resting near belts. From a distance, it looked controlled. Then, at 10:17 a.m., something shifted. A small group at the edge of the crowd began pushing barricades. No clear affiliation, no prior permit tags. Too coordinated, too precise. Adrian noticed immediately. "They're testing response thresholds," he murmured. Hale, watching from a nearby operations van, responded through a discreet earpiece. "Plainclothes units just moved in." The push escalated. An object thrown, then another. Police lines tightened, orders barked, crowd noise surged. And there it was. The moment systems reveal themselves. The police chief stepped forward and signaled. Riot units deployed faster than protocol required. Tear gas canisters fired within 90 seconds. Too fast, too ready. Livestream cameras caught everything. The first wave of panic rippled through the square. Families running, speakers scrambling off stage, and in the background, officers advancing with mechanical precision. Adrian moved forward through the dispersing crowd calmly, eyes scanning. He wasn't looking at chaos. He was looking at coordination. Several of the initial agitators vanished too quickly into side streets already partially sealed. Pre-cleared exit routes. His phone vibrated. An analyst's voice came through tight. "We flagged license plates from 2 vans that arrived before sunrise, registered under Shell subsidiaries." "Linked?" Adrian asked. "Yes." "To Ardent?" A pause. "Indirectly. Through a logistics contractor." Hale's voice cut in. "This is bait." "For what?" Adrian asked. "To justify expanded authority. Because once public disorder is documented, emergency powers extend, curfews, expanded surveillance, rapid procurement without council review." Adrian stopped near a shuttered storefront as tear gas drifted across the street. His posture remained still while officers shouted commands. A young patrol officer approached him aggressively. "Move back!" Adrian complied without protest. The officer hesitated briefly. Recognition flickered. Word had spread since East District. "Sir, are you—" Adrian simply met his eyes. The officer swallowed and stepped aside without finishing the sentence. Reputation travels faster than orders. Within 30 minutes, the square was cleared. News headlines began drafting language. Protest turns violent. But raw footage told a more complicated story. Initial agitation, rapid escalation, overwhelming force. By afternoon, the mayor held a press conference. We were forced to act decisively to protect public safety. Behind him stood the police chief. Behind the chief, barely visible, a private security consultant. Adrian watched from a secure monitor, zoomed, enhanced. The consultant's badge lanyard revealed a subtle insignia. Ardent's secondary logo, the same one found embedded in municipal risk assessment documents. Hale entered the room. Emergency powers declared for 72 hours. Adrian nodded slowly. Procurement? Fast-tracked authorization for expanded crowd control assets. Adrian exhaled softly. They manufactured the justification. Careful, Hale said. We don't have proof of orchestration. Not yet. By evening, curfew sirens echoed across downtown. Officers patrolled in heavier gear. Residents argued online. Some praised swift action, others condemned overreach. The divide deepened exactly as predicted. That night, inside a high-rise conference room miles away, ardent executives watched the coverage calmly. Public sentiment? One asked. Split, an analyst replied. Favorable among property owners. And municipal council? Likely to approve permanent expansion under emergency precedent. A senior executive leaned back. Then the demonstration served its purpose. No one in the room used the word engineered. They didn't need to. Back in the operations center, Adrian reviewed procurement timelines. The crowd control equipment had been delivered days before the permit approval. Insurance coverage adjusted preemptively. Consultants embedded before the first speech began. This wasn't reaction. It was choreography. Hale stood behind him. You're thinking it? Yes. That Ardent isn't just advising. They're shaping outcomes. And above them? Adrian's eyes lifted toward the digital map. Several cities now pulsed amber, 2 red. And above them, he said quietly, is someone funding scale. Hale crossed his arms. We've hit municipal layers. We've pressured contracts. We've exposed cultural escalation. But we haven't reached capital flow. The room grew still, because capital flow meant national networks, political financing, institutional insurance backers, foundations, invisible hands. Adrian's secure device buzzed again, another anonymous message, this one shorter. Stop before it reaches the hill. He read it twice. Hale watched his expression carefully. Threat? Hale asked. Warning? From? Someone who thinks we're closer than we are. Hale studied him. Are we? Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up a layered financial diagram connecting Ardent's holdings to larger asset management entities. One name repeated at the top of multiple funding chains, obscured through subsidiaries, but consistent. He tapped the screen. This is new. Hale leaned closer. That firm advises federal infrastructure bonds. Yes. And municipal debt restructuring. Yes. Hale's jaw tightened. If that link is proven, it won't be municipal anymore, Adrian finished. Outside, curfew arrests began. Local officers moved with rigid efficiency. Some uncomfortable, some energized. Cameras captured both. One arrest in particular drew attention. A middle-aged teacher pulled from her porch for violating curfew while recording from her own property. The optics were severe. Adrian watched the clip carefully. The officer's tone, the teacher's calm resistance, the escalation. History repeating in a different costume. Patterns echoing. He stood. I'm going downtown. Hale hesitated. You'll be visible. Good. When Adrian arrived at the edge of the curfew zone, officers immediately noticed. Not because he announced himself, but because word traveled. One sergeant approached cautiously. Sir, are you here officially? Adrian's voice remained even. I'm here to observe. The sergeant nodded slowly. Orders came down fast. From who? The sergeant glanced toward City Hall. Above my pay grade. Adrian held his gaze a moment longer. Fear again, not aggression, not arrogance, just fear of stepping outside command structure. Authority shock doesn't always look explosive. Sometimes it looks like hesitation. Midnight approached, the streets emptied. Emergency lights reflected off glass buildings in a silent rhythm. Adrian stood alone at an intersection where tear gas residue still lingered faintly. He replayed the day in his mind. The timing, the equipment, the insurance shifts, the anonymous warnings. They weren't just defending contracts. They were defending a model, a scalable model of managed instability. Provoke, escalate, justify, expand authority, repeat. His phone buzzed one last time. Director Hale. We've confirmed something. Adrian listened. The financial firm you flagged, their largest institutional partner, sits on a federal advisory board. Silence settled heavy. How high? Adrian asked. Hale's voice lowered. Higher than municipal, higher than state. Adrian looked up at the darkened skyline, the unseen architecture above visible authority. The true network rarely shows itself. It protects itself through layers, through plausible deniability, through manufactured necessity. Calm reveals corruption, but only if calm survives pressure. Behind him, a patrol vehicle slowed. The officer inside looked at him, uncertain. Adrian simply nodded once. No hostility, no triumph, just presence. The officer drove on. By morning, headlines would frame the protest as unrest controlled efficiently. By afternoon, emergency procurement would be quietly approved. By next week, expanded surveillance would become permanent. Unless something interrupted the narrative, unless exposure climbed another layer. Back in the operations center, the digital map pulsed. One city red, two amber deepening, a third beginning to flicker. Adrian stood at the intersection a moment longer. He understood something now with greater clarity. Ardent wasn't improvising. They were protected. And protection at that scale required influence beyond contracts. Someone higher was underwriting stability through controlled escalation. The question wasn't whether corruption existed. It was whether it had merged with policy. His phone lit up again. Unknown number. This time, a voice. Calm. Measured. You're looking in the wrong direction, Mr. Cole. Adrian didn't react outwardly. Am I? You're mistaking risk management for conspiracy. And you're mistaking oversight for inconvenience. A pause. Then, if you continue mapping capital flow, you won't just trigger municipal resistance. The line went quiet, no threat spoken, but implied. Adrian lowered the phone slowly. In the distance, sirens faded into silence. He stood alone in the intersection of authority and exposure. Behind him, a city adjusting to expanded control. Above him, a network tightening quietly. And ahead of him, a layer he had not yet confronted. The hill. The map in his mind recalibrated. Municipal was never the endgame. It was the entry point. This wasn't just about officers crossing lines, or judges mocking defendants, or security vendors expanding contracts. It was about who benefits when escalation becomes policy, and who protects that benefit. He turned and walked into the quiet street. Somewhere in a federal building miles away, a meeting was being scheduled without his name on the agenda, but about him. Because the system had noticed. And systems don't stay passive when mapped. The next exposure wouldn't happen at a traffic stop or a protest. It would happen in a room without cameras, and the people in that room would not underestimate silence. The question now wasn't whether the network existed. It was whether it would surface willingly or be forced into the light. The map glowed in his mind, and one word echoed quietly beneath it. Higher. Washington didn't announce itself loudly. It absorbed stone buildings, polished corridors, conversations held in controlled tones behind controlled doors. 3 days after the protest, Adrian Cole stood outside a federal office building that did not appear on tourist maps. No press, no public schedule. Inside, a closed policy session had been added to the calendar at 6:30 p.m. off-book. The invitation list did not include him. That was why he was there. Director Hale joined him at the entrance but stopped short of walking in. "If they formalize resistance," Hale said quietly, "this stops being oversight." "It already is," Adrian replied. Hale studied him. "Once we push into federal advisory layers, political insulation activates." Adrian nodded. "I'm aware. You'll be alone in that room." "I usually am." Hale didn't smile. Security cleared Adrian without comment. No visible badge required. His presence had already been approved, reluctantly. The conference room on the 8th floor was circular, strategic, no head of table. 5 individuals sat waiting. 2 senior policy advisors. 1 federal infrastructure finance representative. 1 risk management consultant. And 1 man whose name rarely appeared in media, but whose signature appeared on advisory memos across multiple municipal restructuring deals. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. One advisor spoke first. "Mr. Cole, we understand you've been conducting municipal compliance assessments." "Yes." "You've expanded beyond your mandate." Adrian remained standing for a moment before taking a seat. "My mandate is procedural integrity." The finance representative leaned forward. "You've disrupted public stability. I've documented escalation patterns, which have triggered public distrust." Adrian's tone remained even. Distrust triggered by documentation is not created by documentation. Silence. The consultant, the same insignia style Adrian had seen at the protest, adjusted his cuff. "You're implying coordinated manipulation." "I'm mapping incentive structures," Adrian replied. The advisor's jaw tightened. "You've connected municipal emergency procurement to private risk modeling firms." "Yes." "And from there to capital advisory groups." "Yes." "And now you're suggesting federal advisory influence?" Adrian didn't blink. "I'm suggesting that escalation benefits align too neatly." The room cooled. The finance representative folded his hands. "You misunderstand how governance functions at scale." "Explain," Adrian said calmly. "Risk mitigation requires preparedness. Preparedness requires infrastructure. Infrastructure requires capital alignment. When public unrest rises nationally, municipalities must adapt. And unrest rises predictably when escalation thresholds lower," Adrian responded. The consultant's voice sharpened slightly. "You're theorizing." "I'm observing sequence." Adrian tapped a slim folder he had placed on the table. "Insurance expansion precedes protest. Equipment delivery precedes permit approval. Emergency declarations precede permanent procurement. Capital restructuring follows." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He presented pattern. One advisor leaned back. "Even if your sequence is accurate, it doesn't imply orchestration." "No," Adrian agreed. "It implies incentive." That word landed heavier than accusation. Incentive doesn't require conspiracy. It requires alignment, and alignment scales quietly. The finance representative studied him carefully. "You've triggered political discomfort. Transparency does that. You've embarrassed municipal authorities. They embarrass themselves." Silence stretched again. Finally, the man whose signature appeared across advisory memos spoke. His voice was softer than expected. "You're close to drawing a line you cannot uncross." Adrian met his eyes. "Meaning?" "You're not mapping corruption. You're mapping structure." And structures defend themselves. There it was. Not denial. Acknowledgement. Hale had been right. Political insulation activates. The advisor folded his hands. "We are advising you to narrow your scope back to municipal compliance." Or? Adrian asked calmly. The room held still. No or, the consultant said. Just advice. Adrian stood slowly. Understood. He gathered his folder, but before leaving he paused. One question. No one responded verbally, but their attention fixed on him. If escalation were truly reactive, not incentivized, would preparedness consistently precede provocation? The finance representative's expression hardened slightly. That's a philosophical framing. It's a structural one. He walked out before anyone could reclaim dominance. In the hallway, his phone vibrated. Hale. Well? They didn't deny alignment. A pause. That's not denial, Hale said quietly. No. What now? Adrian stepped outside into the cold D.C. air. Now they decide how to respond. And if response isn't passive? Adrian looked across the street at a row of black vehicles parked in deliberate symmetry. Then, exposure escalates. Back inside the conference room, the advisor exhaled slowly. He's connecting layers too quickly. The consultant nodded. Municipal exposure we can absorb. Federal implication destabilizes markets. The finance representative looked toward the silent man at the table's edge. Can we isolate him? The response came measured. He's not the only one. Silence. Then, we discredit the methodology. Careful, the advisor warned. If we attack overtly, we validate him. The consultant leaned back. Then we adjust incentive flow. 3 days later, something unusual happened. A mid-level city, previously under amber review, voluntarily released internal procurement audits, publicly. Before federal request, Adrian noticed immediately. They're adapting, he said to Hale. Preemptive transparency? Or controlled transparency? The release documents were clean. Too clean. Almost curated. Ardent contracts appeared minimized. Liability modeling language softened. Insurance adjustments framed as standard precaution. It looked cooperative, but it felt staged. Hale frowned. They're learning from exposure. Yes. And that means they're confident the upper layers won't be scrutinized. Because confidence like that doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from protection. That evening, another message arrived. Not anonymous. Official. A congressional subcommittee had requested a briefing from the Federal Oversight Division regarding municipal compliance overreach. Overreach? The narrative was shifting. Subtly. Strategically. Adrian read the request twice. They're reframing oversight as destabilization, Hale observed. Yes. Will you testify? Adrian looked at the glowing digital map. Red, amber, flickering zones spreading slowly across the country. If we refuse, we concede narrative. And if we accept, we accelerate exposure. Hale studied him. You understand this won't look like a traffic stop. I know. On the other side of the city, in a private office with no public directory listing, the quiet advisory figure reviewed a briefing summary. Adrian Cole, expanding scope, connecting municipal procurement to capital advisory flows, potential reputational risk. He closed the folder calmly. Invite him, he said to an aide. Formally? Yes. Under what framing? The man considered. Collaborative transparency. He almost smiled. Across the country, Mercer, still on leave, watched coverage of the protest escalation in federal meetings. He recognized the pattern now in hindsight. Escalation wasn't random. It was rewarded. He replayed his own stop again in his mind, not with anger, with analysis. And for the first time, he wondered who had trained him to escalate, who had reinforced it, who had incentivized it. Cultural shift begins with doubt, and doubt had seeded. Back in D.C., Adrian stood alone in the operations office late at night. No staff, no Hale, just the digital map and silence. He reviewed the congressional request, then the municipal audit releases, then the advisory meeting summary. He spoke quietly to the empty room. They're not panicking. No, they were adapting. Because systems that survive don't resist exposure directly. They absorb it, redirect it, rebrand it. The question was no longer whether corruption climbed higher. It did. The question was whether the highest layers believed themselves untouchable. His phone vibrated once more. Unknown, secure line, he answered. You're forcing a confrontation. The same calm voice from before said, I'm asking questions. You're destabilizing confidence. In what? A pause. Institutions. Adrian's tone didn't change. Institutions aren't weakened by transparency. They are when transparency is weaponized. Silence. That's your framing, Adrian replied. And yours? Accountability. Another pause. You think the public wants to see how incentives truly align? Adrian looked at the map, at cities adjusting, at officers hesitating, at municipal councils releasing audits. At least they deserve the option. The line disconnected. No threat. No raised voice. Just tension tightening. Somewhere above municipal lines, above advisory boards, above capital flows. Conversations were happening about him. Not how to stop a protest, not how to discipline an officer, but how to contain a methodology, calm exposure, sequence mapping, incentive tracing. Because if incentive structures became visible, control models unraveled. Adrian powered down the digital map. The room fell dark except for city lights filtering through glass. He stood there, unshaken. The next confrontation wouldn't happen in public. It wouldn't involve sirens or tear gas or courtroom rebukes. It would happen under oath, in a chamber designed for optics, where questions are weapons and narratives are engineered. The Hill had noticed. And this time, they wouldn't underestimate silence. Whether they would survive it was another matter. He picked up his coat. Somewhere in the Capitol, a hearing date was being set. And somewhere even higher, someone was deciding whether exposure should be negotiated or neutralized. The map no longer glowed, but in his mind, one new marker pulsed. Washington. And it was turning amber. The hearing room was designed for performance. High ceilings, polished wood, cameras positioned with mathematical precision, flags placed where they would frame authority in every broadcast angle. Adrian Cole sat alone at the witness table. No stack of dramatic binders, no legal team flanking him, just a single folder. Closed. Across from him, members of the subcommittee adjusted microphones and papers. The gallery behind him filled steadily. Policy aides, journalists, lobby observers, and scattered quietly among them, municipal representatives from cities that had turned amber. The chairwoman struck the gavel lightly. This hearing will examine concerns regarding federal oversight expansion into municipal autonomy. Framing, careful, strategic. Adrian remained still. Calm reveals corruption, but today, calm would be tested under lights. The first questions were procedural, mandate scope, jurisdiction boundaries, budget allocations. Adrian answered each without deviation, measured, direct, unemotional. Then the shift came. A senior congressman leaned forward. Mr. Cole, are you aware that your recent actions have coincided with increased public distrust in local law enforcement? I am aware that documentation has increased visibility, Adrian replied. Visibility can destabilize communities. So can concealed incentives. A murmur rippled through the room. The congressman's tone sharpened. Are you suggesting municipalities are intentionally escalating public disorder? No. Then what are you suggesting? Adrian paused just long enough for silence to become uncomfortable. I'm suggesting that incentive structures reward escalation more consistently than de-escalation. There it was, the word again. Incentive. A different committee member interjected. You've linked municipal procurement to private risk modeling firms. Are you alleging corruption? I'm mapping sequence. Answer the question. I have. Frustration flickered because he refused the binary trap, corrupt or clean, guilty or innocent. Instead, he described alignment, preparedness preceding provocation, insurance expansion preceding protest, emergency declarations preceding permanent procurement, every answer calm, every word precise. In the back of the room, a senior policy advisor exchanged a glance with a risk consultant. They hadn't expected composure. They had expected defensiveness. But composure under scrutiny is destabilizing. The chairwoman leaned in. "Mr. Cole, do you believe federal advisory boards are influenced by private capital flows connected to municipal escalation models?" The room stilled completely. There it was. The line, cross it carelessly, and credibility fractures. Avoid it entirely, and narrative shifts against him. Adrian folded his hands. "I believe incentive transparency at every level strengthens institutional trust." That's not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. The chairwoman's expression hardened slightly. "Let me be clear. Are you accusing federal advisors of coordinated manipulation?" "No." A subtle shift of relief moved through part of the room. Then Adrian continued. "I am stating that when preparedness investments consistently precede public disruption, independent review is not destabilization, it is due diligence." The relief evaporated. The congressman from earlier leaned back. "You're playing semantics." "I'm avoiding accusation." "Why?" "Because incentive alignment doesn't require conspiracy." Silence. Even the cameras seemed to hold breath. In the gallery, a municipal council member whispered to an aide, "He's not attacking." "No," the aide whispered back, "he's mapping." And mapping was harder to dismiss than accusation. The questioning intensified. Budget authority, communication channels, anonymous warnings. The chairwoman raised a printed copy of one of the anonymous messages. "Did you receive a warning to stop mapping capital flows?" "Yes." "From whom?" "Unknown." "And you continued?" "Yes." "Why?" Adrian's eyes moved briefly across the room, not scanning faces, measuring posture. Because oversight that stops at discomfort isn't oversight. A low murmur moved through the chamber. The risk consultant in the back shifted in his seat. This wasn't spiraling out of control, but it wasn't containing itself either. The congressman tried a different tactic. "Mr. Cole, do you accept that heightened scrutiny can create the very instability you claim to prevent?" Adrian didn't hesitate. Instability rooted in transparency fades. Instability rooted in concealed incentives compounds. The room absorbed that. Because it wasn't aggressive, it was surgical. The chairwoman called for a brief recess. As members stood, quiet conversations ignited. In a side hallway, two advisors spoke in low tones. "He didn't overreach." "No." "He didn't accuse." "No." "So why does it feel like we're exposed?" Because mapping doesn't require accusation. It requires sequence, and sequence was now part of public record. Back inside, the hearing resumed with a different tone, less aggressive, more cautious. One committee member, younger, less entrenched, asked carefully, "If incentive structures are misaligned, what corrective mechanism would you recommend?" Adrian didn't smile, but something shifted. Mandatory independent sequencing audits tied to emergency procurement authorizations. Meaning? If preparedness precedes provocation beyond statistical probability thresholds, capital alignment must be reviewed before expansion. The room processed that slowly. It wasn't inflammatory. It was procedural. And procedures are difficult to publicly oppose. The congressman frowned. That would delay municipal response capability. Only if response relies on pre-justified escalation. Silence again. The chairwoman closed her folder. "We will deliberate." The gavel struck, hearing adjourned. But the real reaction began outside the chamber. Journalists clustered near the steps, microphones extended. "Mr. Cole, are you alleging federal corruption?" "No." "Do you believe protests are being manipulated?" "I believe incentives shape behavior." "Are you satisfied with today's hearing?" "I'm satisfied that transparency is now on record. No outrage, no spectacle, just calm, and calm under fire spreads." Across financial markets, analysts noted subtle shifts. Municipal bond volatility ticked upward. Insurance risk spreads adjusted. Nothing dramatic, just awareness. Inside Ardent Strategic Holdings, executives watched coverage carefully. "He didn't accuse," one said. "No. But he legitimized audit framing." The senior executive leaned back slowly. "Then, we accelerate normalization." Meaning? Preemptive transparency initiatives. And within 48 hours, 3 major advisory firms announced voluntary review partnerships with federal compliance bodies. Publicly cooperative, strategically insulating, adaptation again. At the Federal Oversight Division, Hale watched the news cycle settle. "You forced them to surface." "Partially," Adrian said. Now they attempt absorption." The digital map behind them glowed differently, not just red and amber. A new color blinked faintly. Blue. Cities initiating voluntary audit before escalation. It was subtle, but it mattered. Not collapse. Adjustment. Back in Washington, the quiet advisory figure who had first warned Adrian sat alone reviewing the hearing transcript. He read the line again. "Incentive alignment doesn't require conspiracy." He closed the file slowly. "He's not attacking structure," an aide said carefully. "He's reframing it." The aide hesitated. "Do we neutralize?" The man considered. "No." "Why not?" "Because overt resistance validates him." "Then what?" A long pause. "We evolve." Outside, Adrian stood at the edge of the Capitol steps, looking out across the city. No cameras now, no microphones. Just quiet. Hale joined him. "You've shifted narrative. For now." "And the higher layer?" Adrian looked toward the skyline. "They won't fight publicly." "Then how?" "Through policy dilution, through technical complexity, through procedural fog." Hale nodded slowly. "You'll need to anticipate." "I always do." A notification appeared on Adrian's secure device. A new city flagged amber. Not because of protest, because of an unusually rapid expansion of predictive policing software contracts. Different domain, same pattern. He showed Hale. Hale exhaled softly. "They're diversifying." Yes, the model wasn't limited to physical escalation anymore. It was expanding into digital control frameworks, preemptive authority, algorithmic justification, incentives shifting forms, higher, always higher. Adrian slipped the device back into his coat. The system had responded, not with collapse, with evolution, which meant this wasn't the end of exposure. It was the beginning of a more sophisticated confrontation, not loud, not explosive, structural. And somewhere inside advisory rooms far above public hearings, someone was recalculating risk, not of protest, not of municipalities, but of one quiet methodology that refused to accuse, and therefore couldn't easily be dismissed. Calm, measured, unshaken. As the sun dipped behind the Capitol dome, Adrian turned away from the steps. Oversight had crossed municipal lines. It had touched advisory layers. And now it had entered policy architecture. The question was no longer whether the system would resist exposure. It already had. The question was whether evolution would mask incentive or make it impossible to ignore. Behind him, Washington continued its rhythm. Ahead of him, a new domain flickered amber. Digital, predictive, less visible, more powerful. He walked into the evening without urgency, because escalation reveals itself, eventually. And he was patient. The engine wasn't finished. It had only shifted terrain.